Atapu, assalamu alaikum, namaste, haru nefer. This is Kasantma Kaparu with another video for you. And in this video, I want to talk about the secret to reality. But before I do that, I want you to hit the like button on this video. And if this is the first time to my channel, your first time to my channel, hit the welcome button to get notifications on when I go live or when I upload recorded messages. Also, you can take advantage of some free ebooks that we have. You can click the links below to sign up for those ebooks, and you can start reading them right away. They expand upon the subject matter and more. It gets into the esoteric, the whole spiritual ideology that I teach. So check those out. And lastly, consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do so for as little as $1 or $5 per month. The more you contribute, the more access you get to exclusive videos that teach you about spirituality, how to meditate, breathing techniques, how to use the oracles, how to put together a magical amulet, how to do a proper elaborate ritual, things of that nature. So it's really good. So consider supporting us on Patreon. So let's get into this subject matter at hand, which is basically the secret to reality. Now, the other day I was talking a little bit about the conspiracy theorists and how what they do is they kind of like aggregate information that they have learned from other conspiracy theorists who go on like the lecture circuit. So they'll take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then they'll bring it together, and then they'll decide, well, this is the truth based on, our so-called research. But what you will find is that the main proponents of disinformation on the internet are actually conspiracy theorists, because they have not learned to deal with their own prejudices in terms of their point of view on history and their point of view on the future. Case in point, they have not come to an understanding or willingness to admit the truth that the ancient cultures were predominantly cultures of color, meaning indigenous people of color. This is something they don't want to admit to. And it's a very important fact that you understand how, from a geological or geographical perspective, how different people develop based on where they're located geographically on the planet. That plays a pivotal role in the development of cultures. If you don't understand that, and if you don't willingly admit that, or if you skew the data or the information, then you can never get to the heart of the truth of the matter. And the truth is, again, which they're unwilling to admit, is that most of the cultures in antiquity were of high technology and were of color. So until they can get their heads wrapped around that and accept that, everything else that they disseminate through their channels, through their lectures, is going to be incorrect. All right. And it's very, very important that we understand that, because I think I was one of the first ones out the gate which started to associate the geographical location with the development of the hemispheres of the brain, with the development of the pigmentation, okay, with the development of the high culture civilizations, with the development of high morality, okay? These things go hand in hand. And if you remove one, which is what they attempt to do, from the whole or the ecology of the matter, then it all falls apart. There's an ecosystem here that we must be fully aware of, that all these individual components contribute to an understanding of the whole, and why the space-time continuum has been disrupted, why there's a concerted effort to depopulate the planet, why does the cabal want to basically put a new world government in order, in place. For you to understand these things, you have to understand why, in fact, slavery happened, why, in fact, the Dark Ages happened, why, in fact, the Library of Alexandria was burned down. And those come back to a centralized theme or a premise. But They have done the research, they have traced it all, but they are refusing to admit the truth because of where it may lead, because they suffer in most cases from an inferiority complex. And when you start researching and you start to realize that it was indigenous people who weren't of a nomadic tribe, who did develop in a warm climate, who fostered and gave birth to civilization, that is very hard for them to accept. Let me give you an example before I get to the real secret about reality and we get into all that. There's an author by the name of David Wilcox, okay? And he's big among the conspiracy theorists. And he talks about the pharaoh Akhenaten or Amenhotep IV, okay? And one of the things that you'll see in depictions of the Medu Neter, the hieroglyphics, is that the renditions of Akhenaten and some of his offspring have elongated heads. Okay, very long heads, and it looks weird. Now, what you're going to see come directly out of your Egyptologists and your archaeologists, and they'll make this jump and say that one of two things. Number one, it's artist depiction of the time, but these were just depictions by the artists, because the Akhenaten and his wife, Queen Nefertiti, were not liked because they practiced monotheism. Okay, so in their mind, the artists rendered them skewed and deformed with the elongated heads. Okay. The other thing is, which is where David Wilcox comes from, and many of his books, especially his book on synchronicity, which is an awful book. I read that book and I was just like, I don't know what he's talking about in this book, was that the ancient people, especially those of Egypt, were aliens, which is why they were able to build the pyramids. Okay. So, but here's the kicker about that, right? On both sides, where David Wilcox has his theory about them being aliens and about the modern academic approach or their perspective that it's an artist's interpretation of why Akhenaten and his wife and children are sometimes seen with the elongated heads. Anyone with any common sense who does the research can tell you that the people of the Congo, if you go look, I think the practice stopped in the 1950s, where the people of the Congo practiced elongated head, having elongated heads. And what they would do is when children were born, they would wrap the heads up in such a way to make sure that the skull would stretch. And this is what they would call as lumpubu. Okay, that's the name for it. And it was regal. It demonstrated opulence, higher class structure, and things of that nature. And the Belgian government actually outlawed the practice, but you can still see photographs online to where these people in the Congo, I think they're called the Mangbitu tribe. You'll see very clearly the elongated heads, exactly as Amenhotep IV or Akhenaten had it in the so-called artist depictions on the hieroglyphics of the Medu Neter. So what does that tell us? That tells us that it's not an artist depiction, that it's not aliens that built the pyramids, but it was actually the indigenous people of Kemet, of Egypt, that built the pyramids. Okay, but you see, this is the problem with the conspiracy theorists and the modern Egyptologists, is because they're taking these wild leaps to explain things that are very obvious to them, but because of their prejudice, they cannot accept. All right. So back to what I was talking about originally, is that you have the so-called spiritualists who are on the internet, and they'll call themselves all these Kemetic names and things of that nature. And what they're doing is they're playing the same game. They're taking the aggregate of information, and they're taking the information, and then they're pretending like they have knowledge and they know the truth. And they regurgitate it in such a way as to make you think that they're deep or they're intellectuals when they're far. They're nowhere near real scholars. In fact, they insult our ancestors by the things that they say. When you actively accept the idea um, that aliens came and built ancient civilizations, what you're saying is that the indigenous people weren't smart enough to build their own cultures. And I have proved in my books, my ebooks, especially the new one, the new Capital Ankh, where you have a civilization that springs forth in a warm tropical climate where it is not nomadic, um, you will have the development of integrated brain thinking, or more precisely, right brain people. And when you have a people who are right brain, integrated brain thinking, you have advanced cultures. It is only when you see that the cultures who are polarized either in left or right and are not merging the hemispheres of the brain, that is where you will have a very a slow development in the culture, especially if the focus has not been on the development of of the neocortex, where they're trapped in the R complex and the mammalian brain. And you can clearly see from the writings of the Metaneta and ancient Kemet how their focus was on rising above the mammalian and the reptilian hemispheres of the brain to the neocortex and to integrated brain thinking. And we know by the Shabaka stone that there were three forms of writing, and the different types of writing were simply appealing to different hemispheres of the brain. You're talking about a very advanced culture. So when you start to understand this and see this very clearly, then you'll know how these so-called spiritualists who are on these channels spewing this garbage about how much they know about Kemet and all of this, know absolutely nothing. And I gave the case in point the other day how there was one YouTuber who talked about where the deities are really diets. That's an insult. I don't even know where you would get that from. So here's what they typically will do. They will make use of correspondences or analogies. And they will go, well, you don't understand, but you overstand. And they take that type of thing to an absurd degree because they know that the ancient Kemetic people were fond of puns and allegories, and that the Bible is an astrotheological book based on allegories. And that's very important to understand that because allegories appeal to the right hemisphere of the brain. And if you go back and you trace that, you'll understand that our ancestors were very good at reading energy. And it was a language that they used to communicate to the universe. And now they've discovered the Sumerian texts, and now they're thinking about the Anunnaki and how there was a race of aliens that came and they enslaved the indigenous population on Earth, and then they mated, and then they produced a hybrid race, which is us now. You have to understand that a lot of these texts are allegories that you are not meant to read literally, and that's your left brain going crazy again. And that has to stop. You see, as I said before, all of these people in the conspiracy theory arena are just aggregating information and they think it's the truth. And Ma'at tells us that you will never understand truth. You have to live it first. That's the prerequisite to understanding truth, because you cannot understand truth without Tahuti. Ma'at means nothing without Tahuti, because Tahuti is the measure of the truth. And in understanding, Tahuti is the oracles, which is why many of them don't practice the oracle, because the oracle will validate or invalidate what they're saying if they would only go to the oracles and ask the question. Is the moon real? Ask the oracle. Is the earth flat? Ask the oracle. But instead, they want to use their limited left brain, which our ancestors called a lower mind. because you don't have, when you're operating out of the lower mind, meaning that you're not operating on a Tahuti level, you're not stilling the thought process. And the prerequisite to gain access to the Akashic records or to gain wisdom is to rid yourself of thoughts, names, labels, definitions. You have to stop that. That's the Sebekian left brain mind that does that. And that is not, and Sebek does not in any way deal with truth. He deals with facts. There's a big difference between facts and truth. And this is why the society is in the way, in the condition it is today, because we're confused. We don't have an understanding of what truth is. So you have religions running around saying, I have the truth. So let's get to the heart of this matter, all right? So we've already seen, like, the evidence is there. It's very clear. If you did the research, you would understand things like the aliens did not build the pyramids. Akhenaten is not an alien. Very, very clear. But their racist perspective won't allow them to admit that truth, okay? Now, and also in the same way, it is no mystery on how to build a very advanced civilization. And if you think that modern day civilization is advanced, you're gravely mistaken. Because we have been purposely dumbed down and our progress has been retarded. So you can forget that. We are living in the dark ages because there are people going to school and these prestigious universities and only don't really teach you how to think. They teach you test taking and rote memorization. In other words, you have individuals, like I said before in the previous video, who have been practicing spirituality for years, and now all of a sudden, because flat Earth is now the new wave, they jump on that bandwagon and they say, well, yeah, I've always believed the Earth was flat. When you don't understand the process of intuiting wisdom and knowledge from the Akashic records, from source, when you don't have a process laid out for you to get to the truth or how to learn or how to think, because intuit knowledge means to go within. When you don't have a process that you're practicing on a daily basis, anything that comes along that has a persuasive argument, you'll jump aboard it. And might doesn't make right. Just because a lot of people now are starting to believe that the world is flat and this whole flat Earth thing is moving into mainstream popularity doesn't mean that it's correct. You have to understand how to think. And the way how to think is you have to remove thoughts from the mind, because the thoughts will cloud judgment. With thoughts come emotions, because every definition that you have or every name or label has an emotion tied to it. And emotion sways you. So you're not impartial. Now, here's the Pandora's box that we're dealing with here. There is a disconnect between modern science, religion, because that's the left brain will do that. It will say there's no association between the two. But our ancestors practice homeopathy or holistic worldview. Again, seeing everything in the universe as part of the ecosystem, and that the universe is alive. It's thinking, it's intelligent, it's dynamic. You can interact with it if you know how to communicate with it through emotions and visual images, which is why we wrote pictorially using very advanced iconography, which they call the hieroglyphics, or we call the meduneta. When you look at the ancient writings of our ancestors and how they described the universe, or even their civilizations, which some may call them tribes, but not really tribes. They call gnomes. In ancient Kemet, we called them gnomes. And these gnomes, though they were independent, they acted in conjunction with one another. When modern scientists went to Egypt and they saw these gnomes, they came across a very startling thing. And they said that these African people, and we're talking about Kemetic people, ancient Egyptians, created their structures in society as in fractals. Now, what are fractals? Fractals are self-replicating organisms that duplicate themselves. And you can see fractals in water, in raindrops, water, in leaves. This is what Michael Talbot called the holographic universe, meaning that our universe is such that it replicates or it mimics a hologram. Because a hologram, if you take any one piece of that hologram apart from the whole and you examine it independently, you'll find that the whole structure is within that one little piece that you remove from the whole. It's self-replicating itself over and over again until infinity. And that one piece of that is just enough to build another whole aspect. So then he came up with the idea that reality, or the world we see around us, is a holographic projection, and we are merely photonic energy. We're photons, we're light, because there's something out there known as a template reality that the light is being projected through, and which is we are the manifestation of that. Now, here's where the conspiracy theorists and all those guys are missing it big time. So now they look at this Sumerian text and they talk about the Anunnaki and they talk about the reptilians and they talk about this and they talk about that, of course, not going to the oracles to validate any of this. And then they're theorizing all of these crazy things, right? And then they redo research into history. And they're saying, oh, look, in ancient Africa, they found a battery. So that means that ancient civilizations were more advanced than we originally presumed. Correct, right? But then they go again with the whole alien thing. They brought the battery to them. Now, let me explain this. This is make it a little bit convoluted, but follow me here because this is going to explain to you the nature of reality, and that is something we have to all understand. And I am not shedding any light on anything new. Our ancestors have been talking about this, but we have not been willing to accept it or understand it or proselytize it, which we should be doing. Recent discoveries in quantum mechanics tells us that reality does not exist apart from the observer. The minute you observe something, the quantum field collapses into one among an infinite number of possibilities. You get what I'm saying there? That your belief system, when you harbor a certain perspective or an idea, and you look into the matrix, or you look into the quantum field, the subatomic particles arrange themselves in line with your expectations. It creates the reality that you expect there to be. If I say all men are dogs, then the quantum field will create a reality where men are dogs. If I say that I'm very lucky, the quantum field will create a reality where whatever I do, I happen to gain favor and I'm very lucky. I have a life of abundance. That's how it works. This is what Vadim Gilin in his book called reality transurfing. This is what the whole basis of the book series and the CD series, The Secret or the Law of Attraction. But let's take this further so we can understand what is reality. Of course, now they're talking about the matrix and how souls are now basically reincarnated, but you're trapped in the matrix and your soul cannot ascend, stuff like that. Again, the idea of what they're doing is they're aggregating information and calling that the truth, okay? And because that our ancient ancestors, again, follow me here, made use of puns. And if you read some of the Egyptian and African tales, they are stories within stories within stories, layers upon layers upon layers. And there's a reason why they did that. It's an advanced science. This is the same way as the Bible. It's allegorical, layer upon layer upon layer. That ties back to our ancestors and their understanding of the fractal universe. They understood that there was a holographic universe. This is why they aligned their societies in fractals. I've said before in many of my videos that you can't create anything because we exist in a reality that's abundance. You cannot add to it, you cannot subtract from it. And also that there is no room in this existence for non-existence. So that it means that everything exists in this moment here in the infinite now moment. There's no past, there's no future, there's only the now moment. And within this now moment, everything exists. Multiple versions of you, an infinite number to be exact. Now, pay attention here. Because if you understand this, now you can start to debate these conspiracy theories and blow them out the water, okay? If we know that our ancient ancestors understood that the universe or reality is a fractal reality or a holographic reality, then that sheds light on a lot of things. For example, why is it that when there is a solar eclipse, the moon passes over the sun, it looks like the iris or the eye or the all-seeing eye of Eru? Look at that. Why do we, when we look through a telescope at gaseous clouds in the universe or constellations, they look exactly like the brain cell connections? They look exactly like that. Why is it that the protons, neutrons, and all of those particles within the body are very similar to planets revolving around the sun? Why is that so similar? It's almost like a pun, a story within a story within a story. How everything tends to mimic other things. Why is it now that we are getting to a point of where we can create simulations and we start to think that we may be simulations, that our computers have just gotten advanced enough to where it can create a whole universe on its own? Why are there these similarities between things? And the question is, it's very simple. The reality that we exist in exists in relation to the observer. When you look deeper and deeper into it with the expectation of finding something, it will align with your expectation. So in other words, whenever I come up with a premise or an idea of I'm expecting to find something, reality will conform itself so that I find it. So when I'm looking into a telescope into deep space and I'm seeing how the constellations arrange themselves exactly how brain cells are arranged, almost identical, that is merely the quantum field collapsing and creating the reality that I expect to observe. This is why it's like a Pandora box. Whatever it is that you are expecting to manifest will do so, because that is in the law of the universe, because it is energetic, it is dynamic. And we speak to it and we communicate to it with our emotions, our feelings, and our belief systems. So when you have these conspiracy theorists who talk about, well, we're doing the research, we're discovering this, so we've got the Sumerian tablets, so it must be this. It will be that. It will be that precisely, because that's what you believe. And you're dealing with a matrix that manufactures whatever it is you believe. But don't believe that it's the truth. When you start understanding how synchronicities work, you'll start seeing that synchronicities align with your belief system. But that doesn't mean that the synchronicity itself is telling you the truth. It is merely mimicking what you're thinking. You're absolutely right. As above, so below. They have They have missed that one fundamental fact. Reality aligns with the expectation of the observer. The more that you dig, the more that you research, the more that you look, the more you will find. And what will you find? Whatever it is you believe. That is the nature of our reality. There is no absolute, there is no objective thing there that you can find that will validate that this is the way it is. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. It's a fractal reality. It's self-replicating itself over and over again. When there's a solar eclipse and it looks like the iris, there's a reason why it looks like that, because that's what you are observing and you know there to be. You understand what the eye is and what it looks like. So reality collapses to create that manifestation in the actual eclipse. This is why our ancestors said it is Maya. It is an illusion. It's a game. But you're thinking it's an objective reality, and it's not an objective reality. It's a subjective reality. Understand the two. Big difference. We all live in our own reality tunnel that's comprised of our belief systems, and we're all experiencing those things. There's just a feedback loop. Just like individualization is an illusion, because there's really just one, there's oneness. This is why there's really no discoveries in life. You can't discover something, everything is already there. You can only vibrationally shift your frequency to align with the thing that you want to interact with, but it's already there. It is very, very tricky what we're dealing with here. And it could take you off in many different directions. And I think Michael Talbot had talked about when he was doing his research. And he said the one thing that really hurt people who are going through these synchronicities was that they took it for the truth. And you can't do that because it will lead you down a very dark path. Just understanding that what you are observing is merely a feedback loop, it's merely a reflection of the thoughts and beliefs that you're harboring. Do not take it as the gospel. Just because you found some tablets that date back farther than the Bible and farther than any other tablets and that say certain things doesn't mean that that's true. What you have to ask yourself is, what do I currently believe to have this manifest in this third dimensional plane? If you don't ask that question, it's going to constantly manufacture things. And you're going to be constantly searching, going down this rabbit hole and that rabbit hole and that rabbit hole. And you're going to get more confused because this matrix, this reality is going to continually change it up on you. It's going to change the rules. It's going to change what you find. So you'll find one thing that kind of like, oh, now everything makes sense. And then the next day you'll find something else which totally opposes or cancels out what you previously found. And you're going to get more confused. So I want you to think about that in terms of reality. because it will help you in your life to really understand things, and it also help you to manifest the life of your dreams. It'll help you so that you don't see this as a limitation, but you see this as empowering you now. Because if you understand that reality exists, does not exist apart from the observer, it exists uh, as an alignment to your beliefs and expectations, then you say, well, now I can manipulate things. I can manipulate reality. I can manipulate the matrix to align with what I want. And yes, you can. So I want to say thank you to El Glass for the donation. Thank you for that. Guys, please don't forget to donate if you can to the channel. Harmony, Hatepu, Nahatu, Ho, thank you, Hatepu. Spiritual Elevation, Namaste. Michael, Hetep. Mitchell, Hetep. Lopez, Namaste. Ma'at Sun, Harun Nefer. Thank you guys for joining the chat. So I hope you found this very useful in terms of, really understanding um, the Alice in Wonderland phenomena. And if you're looking and you're saying to yourself, well, how can I control my belief system so that I can manufacture the things I want in this reality? And that all starts with your meditations and your hypnosis work. You need to meditate constantly and only visualize the things that you want for your life. And then eventually your old belief systems will subside and your new belief systems will take over. And if those emotions associated with the new belief systems are strong enough, it will manifest in this third dimensional experience. This is the nature of spiritual work. And this is what a lot of these conspiracy theorists are not doing. And those in the Wicca movement as well. You want to call themselves witches, warlocks, or whatever you, but they're not doing the work. And it's evident by the reality of their lives. Yes, it's great to do lectures and have a nice YouTube channel. We have all these subscribers. But gaining information, which is a Sebek trait, does not equate to being consciously awake. It just means that you're accumulating information, you're aggregating the information, and then you're regurgitating it. But real spiritual work comes from doing your rituals, doing your meditations, taking an audit of all the emotions that you exhibit and saying, is this a good emotion? Is this a negative emotion? If not, how do I deal with it? How do I purge myself of that negative emotion? That's the real spiritual work, not researching and then stumbling onto the latest fad and then talking about there's a couple of YouTubers who say they're so committee and every time they come across a new conspiracy theory, they jump on the internet and they got to talk about it because it excites their kundalini, their raw force. It excites them to discover these so-called truths, but they don't validate if it's legit or not by going to an oracle. They just disseminate that information. And then they'll change in a couple of years to something else, whatever the latest fad is, crystals, whatever it is. Because, and I was talking with a family member about this. I'm going to probably leave you with this. When you do not have a means to understand truth or to understand, or do not have a means by which you can arrive at the truth by putting a process in place of learning how to think. See, our societies, though they look prestigious, they don't teach you how to think, and they will never do that. They will teach you how to take a test. They will teach you how to, um, um, you know, have a good memory and great oratory skills. But they won't teach you how to think because they don't want to produce geniuses. They don't want to produce Imhoteps. They don't want to produce Nikolai Teslas. They don't want to produce Einsteins. They don't want to produce Galileo. They don't want to produce these individuals because a population that is devoid of sages and real scholars is going to die out, is going nowhere. And if these conspiracy theorists don't understand or don't learn or don't overstand how to intuit wisdom and knowledge, then they'll never arrive at understanding the true nature of reality, the true nature of our existence, and they'll never put into practice what they're so-called learning. Because many of them will just continue to regurgitate information, but their spirits will never change. They'll be the same person always. You'll see it. They'll have emotional outbursts. They'll get angry, impatient. You'll see it. They'll curse. They'll bicker with each other. There's no wisdom there. There's no peace there. They've gained nothing. Because all you do is focus on just assimilating information and not assimilating the information, then you're not of help to anybody. You're not of help. This is why learning in the Western education system, which is very left brain and very cold, there's no experiential factor to it. You're not experiencing anything, which is why I talk about if you want to understand things like the Holocaust, slavery, the Civil War, then re-experience it. Put yourself in the trance and go back into that time to revisit that time because you're already really there, you know. So revisit that time and re-experience it for yourself, firsthand knowledge. And you'll come out with a greater depth and breadth as to what actually happened and not just reading it in a book with cold words. That's the key to super learning. That's the key to intuiting wisdom and knowledge, is to go back to source, contact source, and then bring that information with you. Somebody tells me things like, oh, you know, the world is flat, or there's these new tablets that really tell us what happened in history. I say, hold on a second. I do two things. I go to the Oracle, do Oracle reading, then I go into trance, and then accessing source, I will see if that information is correct. And then we can have a discussion from there. Until that point, I'm not going to be talking about things with you guys that I just heard, which is the latest fad, or I just picked up from a lecture. So I want to thank the Magi for jumping into the chat room and see if you have any questions here. Anybody any questions before I go? I mean, I really hope you guys understand that there's that relationship between the development of the culture, the geographical location, the hemisphere of the brain, the pigmentation of the skin, and how that contributes to having a very, very advanced society. Because this society is very left brain, is polarized in left brain thinking. So this is why we're not going to reach the heights that our ancestors intended us to be at by merely just practicing this Western way of thinking. It's not going to happen. We have to start going and utilizing both hemispheres of the brain and start really trying to rise to the neocortex level to be Neo in the matrix. All right. Riley Hatepu. So I want to thank you all for attending today. This is Kasank Ma Keparu, son of Ma and Tahuti. My aunt is a beautiful goddess, Heteru. Until my next broadcast, Amin Ra.